As we journey through the Psalms, we come across many familiar themes that are put together in maybe new ways. Some folks might know the Psalms very well and might remember this psalm. But I know for me, as I listened through or read through it the first time, it sounded like so many things that have come before. But each psalm is unique in the way that it puts these themes together. So Psalm 62 talks to us about how to fortify our faith in times when we are struggling. It reminds us that God is always with us as a source of safety, our rock, our stronghold, our salvation. This psalm reminds us that faith and integrity provide us with stability, especially when we are at odds with our neighbors. The psalmist describes his neighbors as evil. That contention that we share with some of the folks around us. And this psalm also reminds us that no matter what others say about us or what kinds of horrible things that we witness or fear that we will witness, God is bigger and stronger and big enough to endure those challenges that we go through. This psalm works to teach us that God is the most trustworthy place to put our faith. So I want to start at the end, because you all know I like to know the end at the beginning. So the end of this psalm provides the point. Why do we put our trust in God? Well, in verse 11, the psalmist says, God has spoken two things. Well, actually, it says, God has spoken one thing, make it two things. That strength belongs to God. That's the one thing. The strength belongs to God. And then the two things. And faithful love comes from you, my Lord. And that you will repay anyone according to their deeds. And so what this means is that in times of adversity, we can ground our faith in God, knowing that God will persevere through our misfortune, that strength belongs to God. There is nothing bigger or more powerful than God. We can rest well knowing that God's love for us is steadfast, faithful love that will always be surrounding us. And that God will hold each of us accountable to what we say and do. This is our understanding of divine judgment. That God knows what we do, cares about us and what we do, understands our intentions behind our actions, takes all of that into consideration. In those periods of our life when we have felt persecuted or bullied by others, and it seems like there is nothing that we can do to end the suffering that we endure, these two things, the faithfulness of God's love and the promise that everyone will be held accountable to the things that they say and do to one another, help us to maintain steadiness in our spirits, a sense of peace even through the storm, and relief in God's presence. Maintaining our faith through adversity is one of the key challenges of human life. Putting our trust in God can often feel like believing in something that we cannot see and cannot prove or explain. Or at least this is how some folks would like us to think about God. And on surface value, it's hard to explain how our belief or faith in God adds to our lives. When we feel alone and powerless, how does putting our trust in a God who feels so distant from us so much of the time relieve our suffering? But our psalmist would remind us that the easy answer to this question is that God is not distant or far from us, that God is close at hand. God is the stronghold, the mighty rock that helps us to persevere through these storms, that through God we find comfort that allows us to withstand through periods of strife and adversity and struggle, that God is the safe zone for us that proves to us that struggle is temporary and that human power and ability has limits. So that when we struggle adversity that is caused by other people, that human power has limits. We begin to understand our faith more and more as we experience it. As we see the wisdom of the Psalms play out in front of us. Begin to see how God is the guidepost of our lives. And how these Psalms are really designed to help show us a way, a path in the wilderness. And so the guidepost of this psalm is that those sources of human power that people put their trust in, things like prestige and force or violence, money, wealth, are temporary. They pass away. Of course, this is easy enough to say, but it's hard to remember these things when we come face to face with our own bullies, with people who are ready to steamroll over us for, well, something. We might not know what it is in the moment. Maybe it's just to inflate their egos a little bit more, or maybe it's to take something that we have and they think that they deserve. Maybe it's because they've just been a bully for so long, they don't know how to not be a bully anymore. I was probably about 3 years old when I met my first bully. I was in preschool across the street from where my mother worked, and his name was Tyler. We were in the same preschool classes for 3 years. And for 3 years, he tormented me with his words. Sometimes he could get some of the other kids to gang up on me. And I don't really remember if he taunted other kids too, or if it was just me, but it felt like he picked on me mercilessly. And there was always one taunt that I could count on coming out of his mouth whenever we met. He called me, are you ready? Cockroach Becca. Cockroach. You know, it's really silly as I reflect on it now, and it was silly then too. It never really made sense. It was hurtful because we all lived in apartments and cockroaches were the creatures that our parents were at war with all the time. But it didn't make sense. I mean, it didn't even start with the same letter as my name. And they didn't even rhyme. It wasn't even creative. But it's what he called me for 3 years. And I hated it because I was 3 and 4 and 5. There was nothing that I could do to stop him from calling me that. As we grow up, the bullies start to change. They get older, they get smarter, they get crueler. They learn how to rhyme and make up more creative taunts. Some of us find our first bullies in our families. Some of us might even admit that maybe we might have been somebody's first bully. We never stood a chance to stand up against bullies who were adults when we were children. There wasn't much of an escape from them. Bullies hurt us not just with their bullying, but because we need to change something about ourselves in order to survive their bullying. They force us to play by their rules and to resort to their tactics of violence and lying and bullying others to make them feel better about themselves in order to escape from the threat that they pose on us. And I think that the psalmist who wrote Psalm 62 is most interested in guarding his people from responding to playing with bullies by their rules. So he tells his people, human beings are nothing but breath. Human beings are nothing but lies. They don't even register on a scale. Taken all together, they are lighter than a breath. When we are confronted with abuse that doesn't show signs of stopping, it's natural to want to respond in kind. An eye for an eye, tit for tat. It's natural to want to fight back. But the psalmist urges his community, and also us by extension, to avoid that human impulse. Because our impulses, like our emotions, are temporary. They are responses to temporary situations. And with time, they pass. Bullies believe that they are heavyweights, that nothing is bigger or more powerful than they are. And when we respond to them with their playbook, we agree with them. We tell them with our actions that they are great and mighty. We trust them, believe that what they say is true. We put our faith in them, and so we become like them. The trouble is that an eye for an eye leaves everyone blind. That without God, we find no redemption, no forgiveness, no hope for a second chance. We are left struggling for safety with no place to rest from all of the human storms, all of the drama that we find so fascinating. So I left my preschool after kindergarten and started going to the public school that was around the corner from my house. It was better. There were more kids, I made new friends, and things were truly starting to look up. And then one day, my mother took me back to preschool so that I could visit with some of my old teachers, which was exciting because I had loved my teachers. Going back was a little odd, though. Even though I had been gone for less than a year, everything looked totally different. Maybe that's something you've noticed in your own memories of going back to places that you saw when you were younger, or that you were around a lot when you were younger. Things seem bigger or smaller, and nothing is ever in the right place. We visited the playground where my kindergarten teacher was with her class. This was the last teacher that I had been with. at this school. And she greeted us warmly, and then she started looking at her students a little distracted, and she said, "You know, there's one student here who I think you might know. One student got held back last year." And I was so curious about who this could be. And I started listing through my friends that I remembered and who I would love to see. And then she walked me over and she said, "Oh, yes, here he is. It's Taylor. You two remember each other, don't you?" And there in front of me stood my tormentor. And you know, he looked a lot smaller than I remembered him. And he looked down at his shoes and he quietly said hello. And then I walked away from him and we never visited the school again. Bullies are like that. They are tough until they learn that they have no control over you. But it's up to us to realize that these bullies are no more than just hot air and that their insults really don't hold much weight. So I've just told you a silly little childhood story about the first bully who I knew. And these are stories that we collect over time, these childhood stories. They teach us things. They teach us how to deal with situations as we get older. They provide a framework for us. And now as we get older, we know that the bullies get bigger and stronger and more creative. That there are more threatening situations that cross our path. This was not the last bully that I faced, and many of them have been more harmful. But this taught me an important lesson. It taught me that at the end, that my bully was my bully because, well, he was jealous. I can't say exactly what he was jealous of. But there was something about my 3-year-old self that his 3-year-old self wanted to crush. Perhaps it was something that he noticed in me that someone in his family had noticed in him and crushed. Imagine that there could be someone, some adult somewhere in this young boy's life who saw this new life and innocence of a toddler and wanted to crush it. When we put our trust in God, we do more than just believe that God exists. It's more than just belief. It's a claim that humans are temporary and finite and powerless compared to the stronghold, the love of God. We trust that we do not need to build strongholds to protect against each other, that we don't have to build walls between us, that we don't have to compete with each other or try to steal things from each other, because God is already our stronghold. We learn that most of the threats that we throw at one another are just that, threats. Words that don't hold much weight. Words that don't have power behind the words that don't have the power of action behind them. And when we put our trust in God, we orient ourselves. We choose to lead a life of compassion and justice and peace. Kind of like you would orient a compass. So that when God is our true north, all of our other priorities fall into place. And we can respond to the adversity that we will inevitably face in our lives from a place of thoughtfulness and peace. rather than from an off-balance reaction. We put our trust in God to build a life of faith that withstands the storms of our lives. To remember that our salvation comes from God, not from our own doing. That God is our strength, our rock, and our stronghold, the one safe place through all the storms. And for this we extend our gratitude, and for this we orient our lives toward God. And I will leave you with a prayer poem inspired by this psalm. Through God alone, I know peace. Through God, I find relief from my suffering. I have set my inner compass toward God, and the needle never wavers off course. God is my rock, my salvation, my stronghold. Others will set their compass toward power, privilege, and desire. They lie, they steal, they attack each other to get what they want. They bully the weak until the weak burst open. And they will tear apart whoever stands in their way so that they can get more. They are masters of deceit. And when they do speak the truth, their insides squirm because their deeds do not align with the words that they speak. And so I turn to God for relief from human hypocrisy. God is my rock, my salvation, my stronghold. Through God I find safety. God is my refuge. And to all of you who know what it feels like to be trampled over, trust in God. Let God into your heart and let God align your inner compass. God will relieve your suffering. God is our refuge. Withdraw your trust from the lies that your neighbors tell you, for they are filled with hot air. Their lies will float away. Their words hold no weight. For God is our rock, our salvation, our stronghold. Do not believe their lies. Violence cannot solve your problems. Stealing will not gain you what you deserve. The money cannot buy you happiness or well-being. There is one thing that I know to be true. Nothing is bigger or stronger than God. And so I choose to put my faith in these two things. First, that God's love endures through all the storms that life will throw at it. And second, that God will hold us accountable for the words that we say and the things that we do. For God is my rock, my salvation, and my stronghold. Amen.